Well, Dr. No-vember has now truly started, and I'm over halfway through our group read, which is Graham Greene's The Quiet American, and it's just as good as I remember it. And it got me thinking more about Graham Greene and, of course, his own career in espionage and also his relationship to one of the most famous traitors of all time. Who am I talking about? Well, it's probably very easy to guess. And if you know anything about Green, you'll probably know exactly who I'm talking about. But today I want to explore that friendship, which kind of sounds, more like the plot of a Cold War thriller than anything else. But of course, it's actually true, which, like a lot of things, the truth is much better and more fascinating than any kind of fiction. And I'm going to call the video The Spy and the Author. Hello everybody, welcome to and welcome back to Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark, and I hope you're doing well. So yes, The Spy and the Author. Well, the spy, of course, is the heinous traitor Kim Philby, and the author being, as I've already mentioned, Graham Greene. So one of Britain's greatest novelists and one of Britain's most infamous scoundrels, let's say. I do, before I start, have a kind of small connection to Kim Philby. I suppose that's I'd rather have one to Graham Greene, perhaps, but is that Kim Philby's son John actually went to the same school as I did. Not at the same time, I hasten to add, because I'm much, much younger. But I do think that's kind of cool. So yeah, Graham Greene, you know him, of course, from books The Quiet American, Our Man in Havana, The End of the Affair, Brighton Rock, The Third Man, of course. He's a fantastic novelist, someone fascinated by, the human condition, betrayal, loyalty, and especially things like moral compromise. Now, there is some debate as to the extent of The Quiet American being an espionage novel. Let's just say it's not an espionage thriller, it is a novel that has espionage in it. And I think that's good enough, but we'll talk more once I finish that. And Kim Philby, of course, was the most successful Soviet double agent in British history, who was known to be charming, brilliant, and utterly treacherous, of course, right? So what makes their relationship so fascinating is that Greene and Philby weren't just acquaintances. It's not like they just kind of came across each other in the halls of Whitehall or whatever during the Second World War. Greene actually worked under Philby at MI6 during the war, and even after Philby defected to Moscow in 1963, Graham Greene remained loyal to him as a friend, yes, but perhaps also loyal to an idea. So during the war, as I said, both men were stationed in British intelligence. Greene admired Philby very much. He admired his coolness and his confidence, that perfect mask for a spy. Of course, when the truth emerged years later that Philby had actually been working for the Soviets the entire time, oddly enough, Greene didn't turn his back on him in the way that others did. He wrote, "Philby was a very good officer, loyal, efficient, and brave. It seems to me that betrayal can be a matter of perspective." Now, does that cast any shadow or doubt on Greene's own loyalties? I don't know. We'll have to see. It's very much a sentence in keeping with Greene's style, I would say. Wouldn't you? He certainly didn't see the world in black and white, and for him, even such terrible sin as betrayal of one's friends and family and country did come coloured with shades of grey. Not quite 50 of them, perhaps, but yeah. So when Philby defected to the Soviet Union, Britain, of course, was humiliated because Philby was a very high-ranking official within MI6. He may even have gone on to control the whole thing, so that would have been quite impressive and extremely damaging had that happened. One thing to remember is that however affable Philby does come across, he did betray countless agents and secrets that caused many lives to be lost, and I think that's something important to remember. and rightly so, he is regarded as a traitor. But for Green, he remains still a human being above all else, someone who had just chosen a different loyalty. Now, Green once said he didn't approve of Philby's actions, but he understood them. And I think that there's probably some element to that, because I think it's very easy. I mean, if you're friends with somebody and then something like that happens, it's very easy to just go completely one direction. But to actually sit down and look at it, as closely as you can, I think a lot of us might well come to a similar opinion. But I don't know. Luckily, I'm not in MI6, and I haven't any good friends from MI6 who have betrayed me and my political ideals, let's say. So, yeah, I think his attitude towards Philby is also very much evident in his fiction. That idea of understanding is perhaps maybe more powerful even than passing judgment. You can feel that Philby's shadow falls across Green's novels. The spies who doubt, who hesitate, who betray one master to serve another. The human factor in particular, that was written in 1978, reads like Green's personal apology to Philby, or perhaps even to himself. Its hero is a British spy who passes secrets to the Soviets not for ideology, but out of love and loyalty. And again, that's kind of a recurring theme. Love and loyalty, and whether it's loyalty between friends, lovers, or any other kind of relationship, definitely crops up. It crops up even in The Quiet American. It's almost as if Green used fiction to explore the question that Philby left behind. Can betrayal ever be considered honourable? Remarkably, and I didn't know this until recently, that Graham Greene actually went to visit Philby in Moscow shortly before he died, back in 1986. They drank together, they reminisced, and Greene later wrote a short introduction to a book defending Philby. And he also wrote the foreword to Philby's autobiography, My Silent War, by Kim Philby, and it was also adjusted in 1968 into an essay, which I may read at the end of the video. So he never romanticized Philby, but he didn't entirely condemn him either, which I think also speaks volumes. There's something even kind of touching about that. These two old men, one an exiled traitor, the other a very famous novelist, haunted by his faith and his doubt over his faith, and maybe other things as well, sharing a drink as the Cold War moved slowly towards its end. Still, to conclude, I suppose, the story of The Spy and the Traitor it's not just a story of espionage, of course. It's one of moral complexity, again, a theme so central to a lot of Green's works. Green and Philby remind us that loyalty can mean very different things depending on where you stand on, I don't know, political spectrums, for example, something like that. And perhaps that's why Green's novels still resonate with us today, because he saw that good and evil aren't sides in a war. You're not good against evil. The good and evil resides in all of us. It's part of us. So I think I'll leave you with that, and I will just finish by reading this introduction, or this essay rather. It forms part of 3 essays he wrote called on revolutionaries. He wrote on Ho Chi Minh, which again is important to our book, The Quiet American, but also Fidel Castro. And the last element is The Spy. Espionage today is really a branch of psychological warfare. The main objective is to sow mistrust between allies in the enemy's camp. Fucks and none may have enabled Russia to advance their manufacture of atomic bombs by a few years, but sooner or later, in any case, the Soviets would have reached sufficient parity in the ability to destroy the world, and the interval, whether short or long, contained no real danger. The West, after the traumatic shock of Hiroshima, was not prepared to make another unilateral atomic attack. The real value of the two scientists to the Soviets was not the benefit they received from their scientific information, but from their capture and breakdown in Anglo-American relations which followed. A spy allowed to continue his work without interference is far less dangerous than the spy who was caught. How right SIS was to defend Philby and how wrong MI5 to force him into the open. The West suffered more from his flight than from his espionage. I sometimes like to imagine what would have occurred if Kim Philby had in fact, as many foretold, become C, the chief of the Secret Service. The kind of information he would have had at his disposal, C could hardly have increased greatly in interest, and it might even have diminished. No nuts and bolts, only the minutes of great vacuous high-level conferences. The moment would certainly have arrived sooner or later when the KGB thought it time to arrange a tip-off to MI5, followed by C's successful flight and the world's laughter. Since espionage has taken to psychological warfare, it has taken too to literature, so that is just as well to examine carefully any spy memoirs. All the same, My Silent War is not the book which Kim Philby's enemies anticipated. His autobiography is an honest one, well written, often amusing, and the story he has to tell after the flight of Burgess and Maclean is more gripping than any novel of espionage I can remember. We were told to expect a lot of propaganda, but it contains none, unless a dignified statement of his beliefs and motives can be called propaganda. The end, of course, in his eyes, is held to justify the means, but this is a view taken perhaps less openly by most men involved in politics. If we are to judge them by their actions, whether the politician be a Disraeli or a Wilson, he betrayed his country. Yes, perhaps he did, but who among us has not committed treason or something to something or someone more important than the country? In Philby's own eyes, he was working for a shape of things to come from which his country would benefit. Anyway, moral judgments are singularly out of place in espionage. He sent men to their death is a kind of stock phrase which has been used against Philby and Blake. So does any military commander, but at least the cannon fodder of espionage wars are all volunteers. One cannot reasonably weep at the fate of the defecting spy Volkov, who was betraying his country for motives perhaps less idealist than Philby's. Like many Catholics who in the reign of Elizabeth worked for the victory of Spain, Philby has a chilling certainty in the correctness of his judgment, the logical fanaticism of a man who, having once found a faith, is not going to lose it because of the injustices or cruelties inflicted by erring human instruments. How many a kindly Catholic must have endured the long bad days of the Inquisition with this hope of the future as a riding anchor. Mistakes of policy would have had no effect on his faith, nor sorry, I'm reading without my glasses and I'm now lost. Nor the evil done by some of his leaders. If there was a Torquemada now, he would have known in his heart that one day there would be a John 23. It cannot be very surprising that I adopted a communist viewpoint in the 30s, so many of my contemporaries made the same choice, but many of those who made their choice in those days changed sides when some of the worst features of Stalinism became apparent. I stayed the course. Philby writes, and he demands, fairly enough, what alternative there could possibly be in the bad Baldwin-Chamberlain era. I saw the road leading me into the political position of the querulous outcast of the Cursler-Crankshaw Muggeridge variety, railing at the moment that had let me down, and the God that had failed me. This seemed a ghastly fate, however lucrative it might have been. His account of the British Secret Service is devastatingly true. The ease of entry surprised me. It appeared later that the only inquiry made into my past was the routine reference to MI5, who passed my name through their records and came back with the laconic statement, "Nothing recorded against." He was luckier than I was. I had a police record for a libel action brought against me by Miss Shirley Temple. The papers had been referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the trace had therefore to be submitted to C himself. That's interesting. I'll have to look that up. There was even a moment when Philby wondered whether it really was the Secret Service which he had entered. His first factual reports inclined his Soviet contact to view that he had gone into the wrong organization. His character studies are admirable, but if unkind, don't talk to me of ghostwriters. Only Philby could have been responsible for these. Anyone who was in Section 5 will agree with his estimate of its head, Felix Cowgill. Gosh, I can't read today, apologies. Whom he was to displace. Cowgill revelled in his isolation. He was one of those pure souls who denounce all opponents as politicians. The Deputy Chief of the Secret Service is immediately recognisable. Vivian was long past his best, if indeed he ever had one. He had a reedy figure, carefully dressed crinkles in his hair, and wet eyes. To see himself, Brigadier Menzies Mingus, I should say, maybe. Philby is unexpectedly kind, though perhaps the strict limitations of his praise and a certain note of high patronage would not have endeared the portrait to the subject. For Skardon, the MI5 interrogator who broke Fuchs down, Fuchs, you know which one I'm going with, he has a true craftsman's respect. If this book required a subtitle, I would suggest The Spy as Craftsman. No one could have a better chief than Kim Philby when he was in charge of the Iberian section of 5. He worked harder than anyone and never gave the impression of labour. He was always relaxed, completely unflappable. He was in those days, of course, fighting the same war as his colleagues. The extreme strain must have come later when he was organising a new section to counter Russian espionage. But though then he was fighting quite a different war, he maintained his craftsman's pride. He was determined that his new section should be organised better than any other part of the ramshackle SIS. By the time our final bulky report was ready for presentation to the chief, we felt we had produced the design of something like a service, with enough serious inducements to tempt able young men to regard it as a career for life. He set about recruiting with care and enthusiasm. The important thing was to get hold of good people while they were still available. With peacetime economies already in sight, it would be much easier to discard surplus staff than to find people later to fill any gaps that might appear. No Soviet contact, this time, would be able to wonder whether he had penetrated the right outfit. A craftsman's pride, yes, and of course something else. Only an efficient section could thoroughly test the security of the Russian service. It was a fascinating maneuver, though only one side knew that it was a mock war. The story of how to attain his position he eliminated Cowgill makes, as he admits, for sour reading, just as it makes sour writing. One feels for a moment the sharp touch of the icicle in the heart. I saw the beginning of this affair. Indeed, I resigned rather than accept the promotion, which was one tiny cog in the machinery of his intrigue. I attributed it then to a personal drive for power, the only characteristic in Philby which I thought disagreeable. I am glad now that I was wrong. He was serving a cause and not himself, and so my old liking for him comes back as I remember with pleasure those long Sunday lunches at St Albans, when the whole subsection relaxed under his leadership for a few hours of heavy drinking, and later the meetings over a pint on fire, watching nights at the pub behind St James's Street. If one made an error of judgment, he was sure to minimise it and cover it up without criticism, with a halting stammered witticism. He had all the small loyalties to his colleagues, and of course his big loyalty was unknown to us. I find it not the least admirable of Philby's human qualities that for all those dangerous years he put up with Burgess, without nerve or humour failing him or his affection. Some years later, after his clearance by Macmillan in the House of Commons, I and another old friend of Kim were together in Crowborough, and we thought to look him up. There was no sign of any tending in the overgrown garden, no answer to the bell when we rang. We looked through the windows of the ugly, sprawling Edwardian house on the borders of Ashton Forest, in this poor man's Surrey. The post hadn't been collected for a long time. The floor under the door was littered with advertising brochures. In the kitchen there were some empty milk bottles and a single dirty cup and saucer in the sink. It was more like an abandoned gypsy encampment than the dwelling of a man with wife and children. We didn't know it, but he had already left for Beirut, the last stage of his journey to Moscow, the home which he had never seen. After 30 years in the underground, surely he had earned the right to rest. And that's what Green wrote in 1968 and formed the foreword to Philby's autobiography, My Silent War. And you can find that introduction in this book here, Collected Essays of Graham Greene from Vintage. So there we have it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at Graham Greene and Kim Philby, the spy and the author. And, you know, if you feel so inclined to give the video a like and possibly a subscribe, I shall be very, very grateful indeed. So do take care of yourselves, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Bye-bye.